Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have two special guests. We have returning again our good friend, Darren or Darren King, who I call Exo Academian from Point of Convergence and Liminal Frames, and the one and only, what does DJ call you? Money Nate?
That's right.
Nathan from Calling All Beings. And again, he's with Exo on Liminal Frames. So welcome, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
James.
James.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you both on, and I encourage everybody listening to listen to Liminal Frames. I'm jokingly going to call this episode "Engaging the Liminal Frames." It's like a cross between engaging the phenomenon and
There we go.
liminal frames,
Love it.
Yep.
because they get into some really deep stuff. It's a great exploration, which actually, to take Nathan's words before we started recording, he was saying, it's not your typical light show, so to speak. It gets into the deeper aspects of the phenomenon and much more than that. But it's great to have you guys both on, and yeah, I mean, we got lucky last night. So people listening now have probably seen the episode of American Alchemist that had David Grush on. So I just want to start by talking about that because it's kind of like a current event thing, and it was really interesting. Uh, it kind of came out of left field. With the last time we heard from David Grush, he was at the congressional hearing of the UFOs. He did a short, like 5-minute thing on BBC, but the last time we really heard from him was at the oversight committee hearing, and he gave his testimony. In that hearing, he seemed a little more restricted and careful than he was on his News Nation interview with Ross Coulthart, which that was a 45-minute ordeal where he was able to just kind of go. And at the hearing, we had Ryan Graves and I'm blanking on the name right now.
Dave
Dave
Fravor.
Fravor.
David Fravor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was split up, and he gave quick responses at the hearing. And this was almost 2 hours of just him going into less restricted territory, it seems. So, Darren, let's start with you. What were some of your initial thoughts on the what David Grush had to say and some of the things that were talked about?
Well, I think one thing that was nice is I think people got to see him as a human being, kind of humanized him because it was in the middle of being a bit looser, like you say. I think obviously he was probably feeling the pressure in front of the congressional committee. This time he was around friends and people that, were friendly to him. And they really went into some really speculative territory. And he seemed to be, kind of like all of our comrades on UFO Twitter or X, in terms of, willing and excited about entertaining some of the speculation in terms of origins, how they work, those kinds of things, going into string theory and all sorts of things about even the history of the study of physics and where that might have gone astray deliberately, as sort of some sort of shadow attempt to hide actual advances that were made in physics that might be behind a lot of this. So I thought it was really, really interesting. And I think it'll help renew this conversation now that people have new material to reflect on.
And what about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I know we're gonna get into some of this, but I retweeted a haiku that I wrote about Dave Grush a while back. I guess I reposted it. 40 witnesses corroborated his claims, credible, urgent. David has done a tremendous service to this topic, and that really came through again in this as a little mini documentary almost, the way that was shot. I agree with Darren. It was incredibly personable, and if you didn't come away thinking how knowledgeable he was about a variety of subjects, then I don't think you were paying attention. He's a very smart guy, a very bright guy, and he's clearly thought through a lot of the areas and aspects related to what he uncovered. He touched on, the psyop question, whether he had been psyoped. He, explored various hypotheses, as Darren mentioned. For a guy that really wasn't into this and happened upon it and has had time now to sort of digest it and metabolize it. That's a word we like to use. We had to fit it in on the show today, metabolize. He's had a little time to metabolize it. it shows that he's come a pretty long way, right, from maybe that entry point. And I'm sure that's something we'll want to touch on, with this conversation, right? Is sort of where the conversation is going, and what people typically get fixated on, and what the deeper sort of realities are at play here.
I'd also say really quickly too, James, one thing that he did was actually talk about the larger like metaphysics in terms of, he even brought up his own religious history. And I think at one time, one of the guys said, this might turn you into a biblical literist or something like that, because there's this sense that when you bring in the UFO phenomenon as a new frame on religious history and vice versa, then it opens up a whole, new set of questions. And he said in front of this one group he was speaking before that he's kind of come full circle in terms of his own belief about the metaphysical structure of reality. And I thought that was really interesting. He was definitely in liminal frames territory at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that he addressed that, because here's somebody who was officially tasked to investigate this as part of the UAP task force, and he went through that full circle, and it's almost like an example for people to see and be like, okay, religion's not just going to disappear or fade away. It's like there's actually a place for people's religious faith and thinking, because again, there was a concern, allegedly, that part of the reason why this stuff is kept so secret is because it's religion's going to fall apart, and it's like clearly it didn't with this gentleman, right? And he was officially tasked and discovered alleged official programs dealing with all this. So I think that's a great example too, that this is it's not, there's not going to be some kind of religious catastrophe. I mean, hopefully, right? I don't think so. I think there's a place for everything to fit. I also like that he gave a call to action almost for people that are working on the program, and saying like, he came forward, and it's the right thing to do, and it's the right time to do it. So, and he's an example of somebody who was able to go through it officially, legally. And he did face a little bit of backlash, but it seems like he's grown because of it. So I really appreciate that he facilitated that kind of conversation as well. I also appreciate that, again, he was a little bit more relaxed, and he was going into some of the deeper territories. So, one of our colleagues brought up a question, Christopher Wolford, and he said the comment about baggage with non-human biologic, in my opinion, leads me to abductions, MyLabs, and other abuses of people in government and citizens. So what are some of your thoughts on that, Exo?
Well, yeah, I think that that's absolutely true. I think that I was saying to you guys before we went on the air, and I've said on some podcasts recently, that one of the reasons I'm really thankful to Dave is because he's normalized this topic, even the deeper kind of murky waters that people don't often want to get into. I think especially the nuts and bolts crowd within ufology have had no choice but to go there, because it's been part of his testimony, both in front of Congress and in the different interviews he's done. I think that one point that was made on the show yesterday that was really, worth listening to and paying close attention to, was recognizing that it's not that it's either a psyop or it's real, but that it's both. Right? That's what's been going on historically. And you always are more effective in a psyop if you can mix in truth with lies, because when you do that, you confuse people, you tire people, and eventually people give up, often most people, because they don't know how to make heads or tails of what's out there. So that being the case, one of the ways I think this is manifested is there have been military abductions that have been staged to look like alien abductions for a couple different reasons. One is that it casts doubt on the fact that actual alien abductions ever actually happen. And of course, another big one is intelligence gathering. They are often abducting or, pseudo abducting experiencers to try to find some sort of backdoor intel on the nature of the actual intelligences or conducting the actual abduction. So there's multiple reasons why it's happening, and we need to really be aware that it's always going to be a mix of both psyop and the reality, and the trick is trying to sort it all out.
And what do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about baggage, we're talking about a pretty big bag. There's a lot of stuff in the bag, and I'm very impressed with how far we've come so far in the conversation. Just looking back at the hearing, for example, some of the topics that the Congress people were willing to discuss, and even theories they were willing to entertain, that some of them have publicly entertained, have taken this conversation publicly further than I thought it would, where we are right now. And but the logical next steps, if you just start filling in some of these blanks, okay, craft and then bodies, and then, oh, wait a minute, what about all of these stories that we've heard over the decades of people who've been abducted? What about other stories we've heard about hybridization? What about agreements? What about agreements for technology? Agreements, giving us, incredible tools to manipulate the world in which we live in ways we never have been able to before. And if you think about that, if that's actually been happening for decades, where are we now with some of those tools and technologies and insights, et cetera? So there's a tremendous amount to unpack. I think baggage is almost a flippant word, to be honest, because it doesn't quite get to the depth, the gravity of the situation. And Darren and I have talked about this quite a bit on Liminal Phrames, but the rewriting of our history, right? Not just the history of the 20th century, since we discovered the power of the atom, but really all of human history and what it means to be human in general. So that there's so much at play here that if you start looking at all of those components, and if you put a lot of thought into that, now you have, James, you start coming to the conclusion how difficult it will be to kind of map out this type of disclosure over an adequate period of time, right? Like you can't just necessarily dump all of this on everybody's lap right away. At least I don't know that you can. If you did that, I don't know that would be that responsible. So that's where my mind goes with that kind of talking.
If I could just jump into on top of that, yeah, especially the 20th century history. I think James, you and I might have talked about this last time I was on as well. One of the really interesting aspects that got brought up was the Oppenheimer piece and the Manhattan Project overlap, right? Which was really, really fascinating. I've heard that in the past. Like I've come across intel that was suggesting that was definitely the case, that even some of the leaps we made that allowed us to get ahead of the adversaries that were also working on this technology was partly because of recovered craft, right? And technology, metamaterials, and things like that, atomic insights that came to us. So then I would posit to you, what if an intelligence knew about a certain way that history was going to play out and then had an intention to change the way history was going to play out? You might, seed into one side some insightful information about the technology they're working on to just give them that one extra push to get ahead of the other. And then we're kind of in Philip K. Dick kind of territory in the sense of an alternate history that might have been very different if that had not happened. If these crashes had not happened, these metamaterials hadn't been recovered, perhaps the course of World War II could have changed, which could have changed the entire course of human history. This is how deep the 20th century rewrite goes.
Yeah, people have talked about the Atomic Energy Commission and how that secrecy works. And I believe even in one of the Secret Machines books, they are playing on that same theme. And they're in the Secret Machines books likely because that was part of what Tom DeLonge's advisors had maybe given him breadcrumbs, addressing. It has been in the lore before about the Germans having access to such technology, and you hear about Werner von Braun, and even I mean, this is kind of an aside from that, but there's the Karen. I'm blanking on her last name right now, but she was a Disclosure Project witness, and she was allegedly an assistant for Werner von Braun, and she had Carol Rosin, and her, she allegedly was saying that he was read into the UFO program. The accusation she made was that he told her, Werner von Braun told Carol Rosin, that they were gonna stage a false alien threat thing. That's a big part of where that comes from, at least that I'm familiar with in like since the 90s and 2000s. So that's just another interesting correlation between that time period and the atomic age and project paperclip and UFOs, because there definitely seems to be crossover between paperclip, UFOs, reverse engineering technologies, and how that all played out. But speaking about abductions, Exo, you made a comment the other day on Twitter. You said, I would suggest to you that David Jacobs was right about hybrids being introduced into human population, but very wrong about why, to be discussed soon. So what are some of your thoughts on that tweet or X?
Right. Yeah. Post on X, right? I think this is
Yeah.
the actual verbiage now.
Right.
Yeah, it's something I actually was thinking about getting into my most recent podcast, but I just didn't have time because there's so many elements I did get into. But yes, I would say to people that I have sort of firsthand awareness of the fact that there are people that would be considered hybrids, that they have a different genetic makeup, a different constitution than other people, that gives them additional capacities that the average human doesn't have. Some scientists that I'm not going to name, but we know some scientists that would probably be in the conversation, you can imagine, are actually looking into some of the biologics of these people specifically, noticing already a common set of genetic characteristics of these people. And I would suggest the reason why I said it's very different than what David Jacobs would surmise, and I think this is an important point, by the way, and this is something Nathan and I often talk about, is people bring in their own biases to raw data and then sometimes make a conclusion and not recognize that actually it has as much to do with their bias coming in as it does with the data itself, sometimes more so. So to some people who are kind of wired for threat, wired for fight or flight, they see what looks like a different kind of species being introduced into the human population in a stealth manner, and they assume that means some sort of nefarious, malevolent kind of intention. But I don't think it does. I think it's actually meant to be a below the radar way of slowly, over time, changing the constitution of the human population, making it less aggressive, making it more connected to the totality, things that actually would change the trajectory of human history, basically. And that these people can also have kids with beings that are part of normal Earth history. And then those kids have these, not just extra capacities, but again, this different constitution in terms of how they're relating to the Earth and to the rest of the cosmos. And this is intended, I would suggest, to actually help humanity in the long term.
Nathan, do you have any thoughts on that? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it is something we talk about quite a lot, and from my vantage point, it's difficult in some ways to swallow, right? When you're hearing what Darren is saying about this active engagement with the human family, and many people look at that kind of engagement as a violation, right? And it's hard not to see it in that way. If you aren't requesting that this sort of change be made to offspring that you're carrying to term, I mean that feels in a way like a violation. Would we look at it the same way, the way we might engage with livestock or any other kind of animal that we're working with to correct a disease in that genetic line? Do we look at that as a violation? Well, yes, it is, but it also is done in service of a greater good for the health of that particular species. So I think you can take that particular perspective. You can also still be upset about it, right? And I think a lot of people, rightly so, can be upset about that if that is a reality. And this is sort of the challenge too, James, because the kinds of questions that come out from what Dave has said, and clearly, like we've talked about, these are elements, part of the UFO lore that have been around for decades, but now they're being validated in public ways. So the questions that arise from this kind of validation are incredibly challenging to deal with, because they tap into aspects of our understanding that we're kind of ill-equipped to grapple with. This is, and some of this sounds highly speculative to folks. But if you look at the history, as Darren has done, and I know you have done, at the accounts from people who've had experiences, you start connecting these various anecdotes and stories, a picture does begin to emerge of active engagement with the human family. And what does that mean for us as a species? How does it change the way that we think about, who we are, our place in the universe, where we're going, our relationship with these other intelligences? And there's so many facets here that become, front and center and difficult to address.
Yeah, and again, kind of, I think what a lot of people are probably thinking is maybe this has been going on, from the 1940s on. But if you really think about it, this whole kind of thing about the hybridization, or I don't want to say tampering with, but I mean that's maybe
Augmentation,
augmenting our DNA,
right.
right? This could have been going on from the very beginning with us, right? It could have been going on for a very long time, and we may not even be as advanced as we are now if we didn't have that type of augmentation, since as long as it's been going on. It's really brings up the question of, how long has this been going on? I mean, it brings up a lot of questions, right? What is the ultimate intention behind it? How much of an effect has it had? What's the reasoning for it? All those kind of questions come up. But it's, I think that, yeah, even that alone, right, that could be the baggage that David Grush said, comes with the biologics aspect. Because John Ramirez had said, I don't know if he had speculated, that one of the biggest reasons that Roswell was kept so secret was because that within the entity, the DNA that was found, there was like an aspect of it that was part of the human genome. Right. So that, how are you going to explain that to people? That's I think that idea is more explosive than, oh, it's, there's aliens coming, or extraterrestrials, or coming from a different planet, right? Because if there was, let's just say, DNA like that found, in a crash like that, then how do you explain that? You can't, right? You can't. It brings up more questions than if it was an extraterrestrial kind of crash. So I can see the complications behind those kind of revelations. But another interesting thing that I wanted to get your opinion on, is something else that David Grush had said, and that was that, at least some of these, at least from what they had gathered from crashes, some of them, I guess the entities and the technology is not that much more advanced. And he didn't really specify that. He qualified it a little bit by saying, we're only a few breakaways, breakthroughs away from that kind of technology. It only takes one, two, or three breakthroughs, and we're kind of there. So in a bigger picture, that's not like that doesn't sound like it's a million years ahead of us. That could be a couple hundred or 1,000 years ahead of us. And I know there's probably, we can get into other, several different intelligences, but just for that basic comment that he said, that, it appeared that some of these were not that much more advanced than us. What does that make you think, Darren?
I think it's right on. If you remember, I'm not sure if it was on your interview with Lou Elizondo or somewhere else, but he also talked about that, how in some ways, there's actually some working hypotheses about how some of this technology might work. And then when we look at the observables, that actually might be explainable by one technology breakthrough, right? That you could see these as being consequences of this one breakthrough that we're perhaps not that far away from understanding. A lot has to do with, manipulation of space-time and zero point, that kind of thing, anti-gravity research, right? Which earlier on we talked about in the interview yesterday. They talked about zero point energy, anti-gravity research that was going on in the middle part of the 20th century and then went dark. And then, as I think somebody talked about, basically that could mean two things. They hit a brick wall and didn't get anywhere, or they had a major breakthrough and it went black, right? It went to a deep black project. I think the latter is the case. So if these are time travelers, right? I've been talking a lot about this, the extratempestrial model of Mike Masters, then I think the evidence is we're not that far away from that breakthrough. And that being the case, you're going to start seeing groups come back from different points in what we consider linear time. And so the initial ones would look a lot like us, which would explain some of these space brothers and whatnot, and things that have been seen that look fully human, or perhaps like the Nordics that look something mostly human. So you have these different forms that give you sometimes some sort of hint about perhaps when they're coming from. And the ones that come from, say, 200 years in our future, yeah, that's going to be a technology that's not that far ahead, that's within our scope of understanding. So I think you're going to get both. You're going to get some that are from very far into the future. I mentioned in recent tweets that there's actually something to this notion. Around 500,000 years in the future is the origin point for some of the historic cases that we're aware of, but much more recent ones are also available as well.
Nathan?
Yeah, I think that folks can forget. I mean, we all can forget, quite frankly, how exponential growth really works. And if you look at the 20th century, for example, as we went from relying on animals to get us around to literally going to the moon, I mean, how short of a time span occurred from those two aspects in our history. And look where we are right now. We're at the cusp of a tremendous breakthrough in terms of artificial intelligence that I don't think people have maybe have an appreciation for it, because a lot of the AI that's talked about in kind of public conversation is, oh, look what this AI can do with art or with video or voice manipulation, or it's all AI really, which isn't too surprising, is used a lot to entertain us right now. But when you start looking at what it can do in terms of seeing pathways to technological breakthroughs that would leapfrog us ahead from the trajectory that we're on right now, and then also partner with us to develop those technologies and apply them, right? So you could very easily see, with just a few tremendous breakthroughs here in the span of another 100 years, it would be an incredible leap forward if we survive it, right? I think that is another concern, and it's certainly something that's touched on in the literature and ufology, right? Is this notion of cataclysm? Because I mean, to be frank, we're playing with cataclysm all the time here, and we have been for quite some time. So all of these aspects are in play. And you touched on something earlier, James, that I think it would be worth having a little bit more of an unpacking on, but that's sort of what's really going on. Why is this taking place? If this is really us in some way, if it's human in some way, why is that happening? What is the ultimate reason for the various contact and the manipulation of our genetic code and the technology, all of these facets? These are things that I think are the big questions beyond just, oh, how can we master warp drive or whatever, or how can we get a cure to this disease? Those are, to me, kind of the minor pieces to the overall story here.
Yeah, and the idea that some of them could be us from the future, or potentially even extraterrestrials that were involved with our evolution, our augmentation, or in some way, whether from the future or somewhere else, genetically related to us. It brings the idea of, during one of my experience, and I had this telepathic lock-on thing, and the craft was outside when I went out there and all that, but the one of the direct communications were that, they are related to us, and they looked like and I hate to admit this because it sounds so cliche of like the contactees, but the blonde hair, blue eyed in their spacesuits, and there was a male and a female. But one of the things was that they were related to us, and they're concerned about us, and they care about us, that kind of thing. So there's, I don't know what that means exactly. I don't have an explanation beyond that personally. I mean, my mind goes to certain places, but I can only speculate. But that is a correlation with kind of either of those ideas. And aside from that, the comment by David Grush about them not being that far advanced, somebody noted as well that in Mac Tani's book, The Crypto Terrestrials, he posited that idea as well, is that, maybe some of these intelligences are actually from this planet, and that they are a little more advanced than us in some ways, but not completely. So some of them could be a little bit further ahead than us technologically, and it might have a slightly different technological path. It's just they had evolved technologically a little bit different than us. So that's another interesting idea that comes to mind in regards to that comment, which I think is fascinating. I don't think that's talked about too much because we always assume, oh, if they're here, that means they've mastered space travel, and therefore they must be like light years ahead of us technologically. So I think that being brought up was really interesting.
Well, and just to add something to that, James, I know Darren will want to touch on this too, but the very human nature aspects of encounters, right? So it's less alien than we, I think, want to make it out to be, right? The fact that the communication is taking place at all, let's just start with that. The fact that any kind of communication is taking place at all indicates a common kind of link. And it's a vast universe. Let's not forget. So I know that the kind of the trope that, oh, they're interested in our planet and they want our resources. I mean, how many planets and resources are out there in the universe? That why bother with a backwater planet that is on this early development curve? It just doesn't make sense unless you have a vested interest in the planet itself, the people itself, the trajectory of that civilization. If it's part of your family, then that's why the active continual engagement and tinkering, there's some sort of effort to fix an aspect of this problem, the problem of Earth and humans, that keeps bringing its head back up in the entire enterprise. And I think that's if you kind of explore that a little bit further, that's really what this is about, more so than beings from other star systems coming here, trying to harvest things or whatever, which are just in my opinion, the kind of the overblown narratives that you often hear.
The other part that I would add too, James, is that the notion of the future human hypothesis and something like a crypto-terrestrial is not necessarily mutually exclusive. I've had some pretty extensive conversations with Mike Masters on this specifically, that once you bring in time travel, and not just time travel in terms of our future descendants coming back here, but going prior to us, then all bets are off in terms of what kind of forms they could end up creating and manipulating. So again, some of the intel I've heard, and again, when I say intel, that's a combination of coming from insider sources, as well as experiencers, as well as some of these others directly, that there is something like a crypto-terrestrial, but it actually is something that was seeded by future humans. So you have both happening, but from the same origin in a very convoluted, complex way. And even some of the crashes that are famous that we would all point to, some of them, again, when you look at the common genetic link that John Ramirez spoke about, that likely points to the future humans, the extraterrestrials. And that's more of like a time travel vehicle than a space travel vehicle. Of course, both are involved because you've got space-time as one integrated fabric. Some other cases involving crashes that I've heard actually do involve something more like what we would call a crypto-terrestrial. a being that has never left this planet, that has sort of grown up as a sister species to ours, but still seeded perhaps by our future descendants that went back in time and sort of set up that sort of parallel track in history. So when you look at these different hypotheses, what's fascinating is that they can all actually relate back to the future human hypothesis ultimately, because you do have the common humanoid bipedal form, the fact that communication happens, telepathy, all these things. And of course, in a very future case, they're not only going to be able to be space travelers, and in that sense, they are extraterrestrial, but they will have an understanding of space-time that eclipses ours, like as Nathan pointed to, in ways we can't even fathom of yet. And in that sense, they would be what we would consider an interdimensional as well, or an ultra-terrestrial. So somehow this can actually all fit together as well.
Yeah, and again, the idea that there is a possible hybridization theme, right? That would imply some kind of compatibility. So, again, whether it's crypto terrestrial, ultra terrestrial, future human, that would all make sense. Otherwise, I could see some kind of like extraterrestrial trying to explore and collect DNA, but it seems way more involved than that from all the literature and all the witness accounts, that there's something much more going on. It's much more involved, and it's been going on for a very long time. So that, again, that implies some kind of an investment and interest. So that's, yeah, I think that's just another comment on that. But I did want to get into something that Nathan was talking about before, and more, deeper into what Nathan was getting at, is that Nathan, you were talking about, we often get fixated on the simple things, right? The lights and maybe the sightings, some like high level UFO incidents, whatever kind of catches our attention at first. What are some of the deeper parts of the conversation that you think should be discussed and explored?
Yeah, I think it's good to remember we're dealing with the nature of reality and what that really means. And we've, I think, forgotten that models of reality change over time. We live in a period where there's been a remarkable amount of stability in our world, and the models that we have all been born into are incredibly useful. They allow us to have amazing, technological breakthroughs and the reduction of disease, the increased capacity to grow food, our ability to travel. I mean, all these modern things that have occurred on the planet in the last 150 years, they have all happened under an operating paradigm about reality. But that paradigm doesn't have to always be in place, and quite frankly, hasn't always been in place. So we exhibit quite a bit of hubris to approach this entire issue of the phenomena from the lens of, well, it has to fit within the framework of this model. And I think what we're getting at here is that the model is broken. The model itself isn't adequate to explain what's happening with the phenomena. And so what we're working on, all of us, I believe, are involved in this, is charting a path forward to create a new model that does explain, better explains. I don't think we'll ever fully explain, but better explains the way that reality functions. And to do that, and James, I know you kind of got a history with this. You have to do justice to all of the different experiences that people are accounting for. Here I'm thinking of things like, near-death experience and out-of-body experience, abductions, missing time, psi phenomena. These are things that have been reported by thousands of people, yet our current models of reality are really poor at understanding them. So how do we honor those experiences and work them into a model that can explain them? And if we do that, then I think we're getting closer to what this is all really about. And it's about us and our development. It's about our consciousness development. And we haven't used the C word yet on the show, but I think that is where it's going. And I know Darren's got a lot to say about this, so I'll pass it off to him.
Yeah, I think that what I would point to is that when you think about the lights in the sky, the fireworks, if you will, that can be something that can be a hamster wheel that you chase, just like other people chase riches and fast cars and a new relationship to try to create this false sense of meaning. And for some of us in ufology, where it's an obsession, and for many of us it is, I think we have to watch ourselves and make sure that we're not just chasing like a hamster wheel. And if you get what you wanted, what would happen then? Would you finally feel like you've reached nirvana? Or would you then have to find some new thing to chase? Because the chase is actually, for a while, dampens down this feeling of existential angst that is really at the root of your identity and your purpose and your journey. So what I would point to is that something I've mentioned more and more in my podcast on Point of Convergence, we talk about liminal frames as well, is that what I found really interesting and compelling is that there's so much corroboration and overlap between ancient Eastern spiritual traditions, as you and I have that in common, James, Buddhism, Hinduism, Vedantic thought, non-duality in general, and what these others are telling us. And also even what, as getting on what they're just Nathan talked about there in terms of quantum mechanics, the nature of reality, all of this is pointing in these directions. So I think what I would suggest to people is that in the midst of, yes, wanting to get disclosure, get confirmation, these things we want, the hamster wheel we're on, just don't forget the bigger picture of your own purpose. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is sort of energetic, sort of karmic load, if you, for lack of a better term, in terms of, are we paying attention to resolving the energy in us in such a way that it determines, plays a big role in what happens to us next? Because Nathan mentioned near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. There's so much evidence now mounting counter to the physicalist paradigm that the death of the physical body is not the end of who we are, that it's just the most recent Ferrari we happen to be occupying when we're driving down the road. So if that's the case, and I think what we really should be thinking about is how all of these matters play together, but not forgetting that our first priority should be what we're doing with our own energy. Are we transmuting our energy? Are we moving ourselves forward in such a way that will impact what we become in the future, even in a different iteration? And if we all did that, of course, that would also go a long way to solving some of the global problems we have as well.
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the kind of opportunities we have with disclosure and kind of with taking on the UFO phenomenon, individually and collectively. Because I've said sometimes that, the UFO phenomenon is like a bridge between physics and metaphysics. And in that, we have, what we consider in our current paradigm and consensus reality, physical, real objects that, can crash, and they have metamaterials and there's bodies. Yet, often they demonstrate feats that we would consider metaphysical, like telepathy, dematerialization, rematerialization, and yet they're able to be tracked on radar. So you have that kind of paradox or dilemma that it's both at the same time, right? Both
Paraphysical.
physical. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's an opportunity for us to kind of contemplate that, but we can take this as an opportunity for growth in saying, okay, this is physically real possible, and why, how, and those kind of questions that will hopefully lead us again in either individually as somebody who has had a contact experience and is open to this, or during such kind of a disclosure event where collectively we have to deal with those questions now and that reality, and where's that possibly going to take us? And yeah, I think a lot of that depends on us, as people, of the choices that we make. And that's why this is an opportunity, because it could go several ways. So I'm optimistic, generally speaking. So I see it as an opportunity where we have a a potential to make a lot of growth with these kind of challenges, right? And what Hynek called the UFO problem. He wasn't saying it's like, oh, this is such a problem. It's like a math equation problem, right? So again, I think that disclosure and kind of having this reality apparent to everybody, it's going to take us further.
Maybe instead of problem, we should say UFO phenomenon koan, right?
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, and Valet has used the koan reference. And I think I prefer that, because again, people see problem and they take it as, oh, it's like there's like a pestering or something. It's
right,
but it was meant as like like a riddle kind of thing. But Darren, you another tweet you made that I was interested in exploring, since we're talking about consciousness. You said a cosmic scale Truman Show, but with fractal feedback loops. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think we've touched on a little bit, noodled on this notion of the nature of reality itself. I think one of the questions that inevitably arises when you study the UFO phenomenon is just how deep does the rabbit hole go? Are they co-inhabitants of space-time as we understand it, and they're coming from a different planet? Are they crypto-terrestrials who've been here all along, but still physical beings like us? Are they somehow quasi-physical, like ultra-terrestrials, sometimes here, sometimes not? But one of the things I think we really have to consider, and this is very much liminal frames territory in terms of religious history and our meaning-making models that we've formed over time, is to what extent is perhaps the entire space-time fabric part of a construct that's part of this experiment in consciousness? That's possibly the case. So in that sense, you have kind of a Truman Show, in the sense that we all are Truman, not recognizing that the entire set is actually been part of a construct for the sake of watching us as we grow, basically. And the reason why I said the thing about the fractal feedback loops is because I don't think we've really wrapped our heads around at all, because it goes against so much of our common sense kind of intuitive thinking, which touches on Donald Hoffman's kind of work, that time just does not work like we think it does. That not only are these beings from what we perceive as our relative future, but it's much more complicated than that. And that you have these fractal feedback loops where you not only have like different timelines that are forming. So to touch on this, like one of the classic sort of arguments we've seen in like Back to the Future and that kind of thing kind of sent us on the wrong track, because we had this notion of the grandfather paradox that, how can time travel work? Because if you go back and kill your grandfather, you never existed. How does that make sense? But the way to think about it more in terms of what the way physics usually thinks about it now is that it sort of splits off into a new timeline. So there's no contradiction, there's no paradox. You exist now in a timeline by going back in time that is not directly going to impact your origin point. So both timelines are consistent. But that being the case, there's still, again, speaking of this oceanic model and the cresting and falling and interference patterns, each of these timelines, as well as different dimensions of reality, impact each other. And one of the things I've talked about is how actually every, I would say, decision point, emotive reaction we have, not only impacts us and our circle of friends and coworkers and whatnot, and the person at the supermarket, but it actually impacts entities and other dimensions as well. This is what I think is in play. Multiple timelines of what we would consider our world, as well as other dimensions as well, and all of them impacting each other, it being one sort of grand experiment. And we're basically trying to track and pay attention and make sense of this phenomenon from one frame, speaking of liminal frames. And yet what really is in play is many, many, and how they all impact each other. And that's why even for some of these others, when they talk about they have a good sense of the future, but it still comes down to probabilities often, because it's such a dynamic process. So even I've talked about with disclosure, when and how it's going to happen changes frequently because of all of the myriad influences in this dynamic process, including influences that are from beyond this particular frame.
Nathan, you got any words for that?
Pretty easy, right, James?
Yeah,
I think I mean that's really what we're kind of getting at, right? That there's this we've seen signs of this already, even in our own physicalist materialist model. If you look at the universe, there's there are patterns in the universe that mimic patterns in the human body, right? That there's this fractal nature of reality, even in that realm of perception. So why would there not also be a fractal relationship at a deeper level, which is really the level of consciousness, right? So that we are a in many ways a piece of larger consciousness, that impulses that we have, that thoughts that we have, the way we engage with the world, the things that we prioritize, those are things that in many ways can be mirrored in the cosmic mind, right? This is that sort of grand relationality of reality, that it is interrelated, that to know itself, it has to enter into relationship with itself. Otherwise, it has no awareness, no knowledge of anything outside of, there's nothing else, right? So this is the enterprise of active engagement and knowing and exploration. And that's what we're a part of here. And I think, as Darren pointed out, this idea of, in many ways, a walled garden, or a partitioned kind of universe that allows us to develop by having access to all of the tools, aspects, manipulations that are available in that universe is really important. We need to be able to play and break a lot of things, right? Learn a lot of lessons before we are able to then engage with reality as it truly is. Otherwise, we're not quite prepared. We're gonna get a new toy, and we're gonna enter into that new reality, and we're gonna break something right away. So I think it's a really, at least for me anyway, it has a lot of explanatory power when you look at things, the UFO phenomena from this perspective, and it does change the nature of the entire game.
And Darren, or Exo, you mentioned during your part interference patterns, and you'd mentioned it on your podcast the last few times, I believe. And for me, that's something that's been coming up in my own research and stuff that I've been working on recently. So can you get deeper into the interference patterns and how it relates to this?
Yeah, and I think thinking about it in terms of an oceanic model is really helpful. And I've, in my circle of colleagues and whatnot, we've been talking about this. But again, this is actually pointing back to a podcast episode I did. It was really interesting how that happened, because in the same week, within a few days of each other, actually, I had someone pass on to me a download from what you would consider a gray alien describing time this way. And within the same period of a few days, another friend of mine, an anthropologist who's deep into this topic, sent me an ongoing dialogue he had with AI about the nature of time and how AI would perhaps see time differently than us, being able to parse on multiple dimensions, whereas we're sort of limited to 3 dimensions basically. And it was a really intriguing overlap between the two. They were almost exactly the same, in fact, which is really, really interesting. Raises another tangent that I won't get too much into, other than to say, I think one of the things we open with AI is the possibility that higher intelligences can actually sort of leverage AI to pass information to us, in the same way that tarot works to some degree. It's another kind of technology. But the way that interference patterns work, again, speaks to what I was saying before. And along the lines of what Nathan was saying about these fractal patterns, we notice these repeating patterns throughout nature. He mentioned how, for instance, the neural network of a brain looks a lot like a large scope picture of the cosmos, right? Or lungs look a lot like a leaf. You see these fractal patterns over and over again. But with the interference pattern, what you actually have is, in different ways we measure reality, whether it's time or whatnot, or even how these different dimensions impact each other. An interference pattern is such that you have this, you think about the double slit experiment and how, depending on how consciousness collapses the waveform, you get a different result. And so an interference pattern is when you actually have these different elements blending together and impacting each other back and forth, back and forth. So when you think about time, for instance, it's not just that you have one origin point and another origin point. You actually have them washing back and forth together, thinking about how a wave washes on the beach, and then it starts collapsing back towards the ocean while the next wave comes, and that impacts the first wave. And you have this ongoing, really dynamic process. And the way that these beings describe time is more like that it's more like a drop in the ocean that can move in any direction, right? So when we think about linear time, we think about, is it past, present, or future? Whereas from their point of view, picture a drop in the ocean that can go in any direction. But not just that, but every drop also, of course, is the ocean and is the waves that are also individually recognized and represented in the ocean. And you have that model where every element is kind of a holon. It's its own thing, and it's also part of something larger as well. Just like we see that as another fractal pattern we see throughout nature, right? You have atoms are part of molecules, which are part of cells, which are part of organs, which are part of human beings, which are part of a biosphere. It goes on and on. So this is the really fascinating part, is that these interference patterns we see throughout nature, and really to make sense of the way that these others are working with us and impacting us, and us impacting them, again, like I referred to a few minutes ago, is more like these interference patterns.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about how you were talking about time is during one of my own experiences, I had that experience of time, the past, present, and the future as one thing, and I did to try to describe that into words the way that I had experienced it is it doesn't seem possible, at least for me. Just going from even trying to recall the experience to bring it out into words, it's just like my brain starts to go haywire a little bit.
Can I just say
um,
something really quickly about that, James? Because I
yeah.
love that you said that, because one thing I've been recognizing is that sometimes those of us who've had anomalous experiences, when we try to translate to describe to others what actually happened, what's interesting is it happens so quickly and so automatically that we don't actually recognize that we're actually translating and to some extent dumbing it down, right? We actually have to now try to translate it into something you can describe to beings living in a 3D plus one kind of reality state. So there's been times where I've had even intuitive information come to me, psychic information come to me, and someone says, well, how did it come? And I in a split second, my brain quickly translates how I can say it in English language. But that's actually not how it came to me. When I really stop and I precisely kind of tune into that experience, it was through no sensory kind of apparatus at all. It was like something beyond that, right? And one of the things that I've been teaching in my courses and things is this notion of slowing down enough and not being on the hamster wheel so much, so you can really tune into these experiences and recognize that we actually have access to all these other kinds of information coming into us. But we are so busy and we're so wanting to quickly be accepted by others when we describe these experiences that to some extent we dumb them down. And that takes us further rather than closer of actually understanding how it actually happens.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of this yesterday, right, Darren, when we were meeting up, and I agree completely. And in fact, they touch on this in the interview with David that just got published. And toward the end of that interview, around the hour 50-minute mark, they talk a little bit about this translation issue, this transcription problem of you've got, in a sense, a kind of enlightenment that you need to be able to share with other people. And so you're doing that in this very lossy way through language and metaphor and experience. You're getting an approximation of what that, caught feeling is. And that creates a problem in a way, because what we'll do with that, and you've seen this happen in all of our religious traditions, right? You've had these individuals with profound insights about the nature of reality, and they go about trying to impart that wisdom onto other people. And what ends up happening is, instead of it really changing those people in some profound fundamental ways, it does for a time. Over the span of time, what we do with that is we sort of turn those little metaphors into rules and laws and parameters that structure how we should be in the world. And so we almost miss the point. We miss the larger point of those deeper insights, because we are so fixated on rightness or correctness or what have you. And to Darren's point as about the sort of tuning in to knowledge, I mean, this was something that I experienced, personally over earlier this year, in an altered state of consciousness, where it was clear to me that the way in which we learn things, the way that we think we know we learn things, isn't really how knowledge is acquired. That it's essentially part of almost a base field of reality itself. That all we just have to do is be present to it. And we see examples of this all the time with things like synchronicity, right? We marvel at that. Oh, I just had this amazing synchronicity, and can you believe that? And what we often do is we mistake the synchronicity for we get distracted by whatever the synchronicity is, and forget like just the fact that it happens at all. So what you see happen is people will go, I had the synchronicity about this particular subject that I was just thinking of, and that's a sign from the universe that I need to study that subject, or I need to buy that house, or rent that, whatever it is. That's really not the takeaway. The takeaway is that it's happening at all, right? But I think that's what you see happen. It's been playing out throughout human history, as we almost miss the larger point. We get distracted by, as we said earlier, kind of the light show.
Well, and you mentioned religion, and I did want to touch on the religious aspects a bit of the phenomenon, because I think Darren and I have talked about this before, is that sometimes when people are perceiving the UFO phenomenon, let's even say, we've heard about the group called the Collins Elite, who say this is demonic and these are demonic forces. And I mean, you have to keep in mind, it's like, okay, well, what exactly is a demonic force? The language barrier that's there, the assumptions that come with that language. And if you really stop to think about it, what exactly are those things, right? Like, just say, some people will say UFOs or the phenomenon represent angels or demons. So Darren, do you want to break down kind of the ideas behind that, the language barriers, the assumptions, the religious context versus our contemporary context?
Sure. I think the first thing I'd point to is presuppositions, because one thing I point out to people is when they look to sort of ancient religious history to frame their own experience with the phenomenon, in some ways, all they're doing is trading their experience for someone else's experience and their interpretation of it. So you have, Nathan actually talked to this before, in terms of, I've referred to this sort of man, myth, monument process we go through, where you have a human being, could be a man, woman, obviously, and they have an experience. And then there's like a myth that forms around it, and kind of a community that forms around it with excitement. But then we have this need to sort of fossilize it and crystallize it into kind of a monument phase where it doesn't change and it's locked down and it's safe. The truth is the phenomenon's never been safe. Religious experiences have never been safe. But again, human beings who want predictability will sometimes put them in a book and say, this is the way it was. You can't, I've literally been in religious groups that say, you can't have experiences anymore. It doesn't happen anymore because now we have the Bible, right? Literally not recognizing the kind of circular reasoning there. They don't really want the wildness of people having the experience now because they don't know how to make sense of it. So instead what they say is, there was a time in history where that was the case. Now the revelation is the Bible, and that's all we need. But the thing is, again, if you have an experience with a phenomenon and someone says to you, well, that's a demon, there's different questions that arise there. If you just mean some sort of being that you think is somehow nefarious and doesn't have your best interest in mind, fine. And maybe they are what we might perceive as interdimensional or something, or extra dimensional, fine. So in that sense, I see how that term applies. The problem is a lot of people just sort of don't realize they're also purchasing the entire dogma set that is attached to that term demon. So then you're into origin stories around the fall of Satan and fallen angels and that kind of thing. And do you really want to buy all of that when you buy this, beachfront property in Florida? You really have to ask yourself these questions. So that's what I often point to. It's not just, yes, if you want to say nefarious interdimensional entity, fine, we can go there. That I think is an honest approach to the raw data, because this is what I really point to, is like, what's the most raw version of the data? What you experienced psychologically, viscerally, those kinds of things in your physical space. Don't overlay interpretation unless there's a good reason to do so. And I think we should try to hold on as long as we can, almost like with a null hypothesis, to not attach interpretation to these things, so that we have as much raw data as possible. And only then, perhaps then, go through the process of generating hypotheses that might explain it. But then we're sort of marrying the best of personal experience, a body of data, and then scientific inquiry.
Nathan.
And I think that it speaks to the sort of shallow waters that we traffic in modernity, because we don't have a great depth of a metaphysical language to deal with these anomalous experiences. And so, and keep in mind, in the 20th century, for most parts of the Western world, we worked very hard to jettison religious thinking from public discourse and from our scientific pursuits. So we've really bifurcated that way of thinking from the way in which the world has become. And so you have an impoverished people, essentially, that aren't used to thinking about these deeper metaphysical layers and how to map them onto these anomalous experiences. And so what do? They look to something like the Bible and they say, oh, well, I've heard that in the Bible there are these things called demons and angels. I mean, that must be what it is, right? Like, and so then the Bible because keep in mind, there's been so much over the centuries, like of Christendom. There have been so many attempts to explain these elaborate kind of cosmologies, and the war between Satan and God, and all of these things that have been written about for centuries in Christendom. It's been worked on, it's been workshopped. These are ideas that are readily available right off the shelf. So if you have no other language that you can use to explain these experiences, well, I can just go and grab this right off the shelf and open it up, and what is it? Oh, it's a demon, and it's an angel, and so therefore it must be about this Christianity thing. I think that's where a lot of folks go, and it's just because we don't have in this day and age a very deep, broad understanding of how anomalous experience interacts with the human experience. Like, in many ways, to be human is to experience anomalous things every single day. It's that we've, in a way, become numb to those.
Yeah, and actually going back to the David Grush discussion as well, I think it was interesting that the host brought up American Cosmic, and I believe Saint Francis of Assisi, and how back in those days it was interpreted as like the stigmata type event, and in a contemporary lens where we have ideas like UFOs as a technology, and aliens or extraterrestrials and things like that nowadays we assume to that lens, basically, because it's and in 100 or 200 years from now, whatever the contemporary lens is the lens that we're going to perceive it from, right? Generally speaking. So you have that issue. But since we were talking about angels and demons, let's get into the idea of UFOs as a threat versus UFOs as the space brothers that are here to help us, and how if you look at the UFO literature or even people's experiences that we may know, all the kind of information that we have available to us now, through books and the internet and through people that have given testimony, you have kind of everything under the sun, right? You hear about great positive experiences, you hear about negative experiences. Of course, we have the kind of complication there of, okay, maybe some of these are staged events that are human actors that are doing something, everything from psychological warfare, my labs, the military abductions, and other types of disinformation. So we have all those things kind of, along with genuine anomalous experiences on top of that. And the likelihood, in my opinion, that we're dealing with multiple phenomena, not just a singular intelligence. So how do you I was going to say, how do you sleep at night with that? But how do you reconcile all those kind of moving parts? Darren.
I sleep just fine, James. No.
Yeah, I have in the last 3 days,
Yeah,
but
right.
it's for other reasons.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, because I agree with you that it's a broad swath. And I think even if you just look at limit it to the future human hypothesis, extraterrestrials, we know in our own era, there are different groups with very different notions of what is right and wrong, how you should run a government, how society should function, those kinds of things, just in one era with so much common history. So it's not difficult to imagine that if you scale out humanity in the future, that also begins to bring in the genome of other beings. That's why we have these forms that we can also relate back to the earth, reptilian kind of lizard types, insectoid types, right? This is all relatable back to the earth. So that begins to happen. But it's not surprising that you would have at least as much complexity as we have now, if not much more, because you have evolving. I would suggest, again, bringing in the sort of spiritual energetic perspective. In the long frame, you have kind of moved towards more transpersonal experience and understanding and identity. And we see that in the ones that are coming that are the most transcendent, that are the most, in some ways, hands off in terms of intervention. I would suggest the ones that we often do capture on film, whether it's the UFOs themselves or the beings, that actually the least advanced ones are the only ones that we actually can capture on film. And so I think sometimes those ones are up to nefarious ends, and we need to be aware of that. So I think we should expect the full spectrum. And, as I said in the podcast on the weekend, when you answer the door, you don't assume it's a good person or a bad person. You have your, discernment you bring with you, and you try to read it energetically. You're looking for, signs and those kinds of things. One of the things I get into in my course is how it's so essential that we develop this energetic discernment, because we can't just rely on what things look like physically, especially when they can manipulate physical appearances, right? So being able to tune into that, I think, is part of our evolutionary history, to be able to tune into energy directly. The other thing I would say, in addition to the fact that there sort of is a range, a spectrum of what we would perceive as good and bad, because of course it's relative to who you are and your own sense of what is good and bad. But you also have cases like you mentioned there was St. Francis of Assisi, where I know personally people that are experiencers that everyone would know their name, who've had experiences, for instance, where they had a very positive experience with a being, with an orb, for instance, and it changed their life in very positive ways. But they also suffered rheumatoid arthritis because they got too close to this orb. And both can happen. And again, if you take too cursory a view, you could say, well, that must be an evil entity that is inflicting damage on your body. But no, actually, perhaps in your own enthusiasm, you just got a little too close. So I would just suggest to people, if you do notice orbs, don't go running directly at them and don't get too close. Make sure they don't pass through your body, because even though it's unintentional, that can actually cause physical damage, radiation burns, and those kinds of things. So sometimes we have not only a spectrum, but also we have the sense that sometimes damage can happen that wasn't intentional just because of the interface between us and them.
Right, kind of like the Travis Walton case as an example, where Travis Walton claimed that he was injured by the craft, but the reason they took him was to heal him, and that's the sense that he came away with. So that's an interesting, again, example kind of that. But Nathan, what do you got?
Yeah, well, I mean, trauma should not be something that is ignored, right? So I want to make it clear that uh, pain is real, and injury is real, and these are things that we're not going to just brush aside because maybe they happened uh, because of an interaction with a non-human intelligence. I think a lot of folks are willing to kind of do that and just sort of paint with a broad brush and say, well, that's whatever, it's not a big deal because their intention is good or what have you. As Darren rightly points out, the whole spectrum of behavior is at play here, just like it is in the human family. So you've got human actors who do incredibly evil things, and you've got human actors who do incredibly benevolent things, and it's all the same human family, right? So intelligence, because of its very nature, is a little bit chaotic. It has great capacity for good as well as evil, what we would call evil, and that is, as Darren pointed out, it is a relative perspective. If I go outside and accidentally, step on an anthill or something, was it evil? Was that an evil intent that I had to kill some ants there? No, but from the ant's perspective, I mean, that's not great, right? And I think that all those, both of those points are equally valid because they're both true, right? And this is just, again, speaking to the complexity of this issue, where the knee-jerk response is often to flatten the entire thing and to go into a essentially a kind of a camp. Well, I'm in the love and light camp. I don't want to think about anything bad. That's all human, my lab stuff or whatever. It's not the real non-human intelligences. And then you've got the other camp that says, you know, national security threat, they can't be trusted, we've got to arm ourselves, etc. I don't think it's just not that binary. And keep in mind, when we're talking about the technology, it's often the greatest danger is what we will do with it, not necessarily what they are doing. So, when we see that immense amount of power, there's an implied, almost a mirroring aspect here that is at play of what we would do with the same kind of power. What would our world powers do if they had that capability? Some pretty bad things, I think. And that again gets at the consciousness development of where we are on the planet. And are we at the place where this kind of disclosure is going to be positive, productive, well received, or maybe not?
Yeah, and Exo, Darren, you have the essence of being, right? You have that set up, and you have a course that's already full called Expanding Awareness. But with everything going on, right, potentially, right, confirmation, the general public learning about this, even UFO, people, right, people that are in UFO researchers, like coming to grips with the fact that these are realities, right? This is, the training wheels are coming off, so to speak, and this is becoming more real by the day. Maybe for some people it was a fun idea and it was interesting, but now it's all of a sudden, here it is. So, with the kind of courses and perspective that you bring, what are some things that people can think about and do to help them kind of navigate this terrain?
It's a good question. And I think one thing I would say is that the shock coming to the system is not just that there's alien beings in our midst, or what we perceive as alien beings, and UFOs, that is advanced technology that changes our understanding of where we sit sort of on the hierarchy. We're no longer at the top of the hill like we have assumed for so long, but also that there's this energetic aspect of reality where you've got this kind of interdimensional, like I say, these interference patterns that are impacting each other. So part of what's going to come online eventually is this recognition on a broad scale that there is this interplay, this interpenetrating nature of these different realities. And so sometimes that means you might have a reaction that seems disproportionate. That might be because you're being impacted by some sort of other intelligence. One thing I would add that probably will be quite startling to some people is that even when it comes to, and I made this point on the podcast this weekend, when it comes to something like disclosure or confirmation, again, we have to be aware these others are not just sitting on the sidelines and watching with popcorn. I mean, they have had an agenda, a strategy all along. It's not like they've suddenly decided to exit the scene. And I would suggest to people that they are controlling the way this rolls out, partly by controlling people's perception and controlling people's behavior. This is such a key aspect of the phenomenon, is that people do things that don't make any sense to them. People go on a camping trip, right? We think about these different cases where a UFO is spotted, an abduction happens, and the whole point of going on the trip was to actually take photos of wildlife or something. And the one thing they forget is the camera. That doesn't make any sense, right? This is the degree to which they can wield control over us. But it's not just that in terms of individual actions. It's our emotional states even can be impacted. So what I really try to champion is this notion that the more we are self-aware about our own energy, not only for things like CE5 in terms of what we might be emitting to the cosmos when we're dialing that number, so to speak, and what might pick up on the other end, but also just in terms of our day-to-day activities, reckoning with the fact that not only is it about the guy that cut us off in traffic and the argument I had with my spouse this morning, but also these other kind of entities working with, controlling, impacting my emotional state, and that changing my reactions. So some of the way this has been handled politically, I would even suggest to people, is that, again, for people who are not very self-aware and aware of their own sort of energy and their energetic sort of circumstance and context, they become very easy to control by some of these others. And some of the ones you've heard about, for instance, the reptilians, let's just go there, why not? They work in these manner. They do control sort of behind the scenes by being able to adjust people's perception, people's emotional states, the way people consider different matters. So if you don't develop a really fine-tuned awareness of your own energy and your context and what usually is there, then you're susceptible to these kinds of influences. I would give the analogy of, with bank tellers, they used to not show them 100 different examples of counterfeit bills. Instead, they would have them look at a real bill over and over again, study it, feel it, right? And to the point they had this second nature sense of what a real bill feels like. So when a counterfeit's present, you recognize it right away because of what it's not. So in that same way, if you fine tune your ability to understand your own energetic context, then you're much more likely to pick up when there's kind of an influence that's not coming from you, not part of your usual context. This is why I say disclosure is such a massive topic, because this is partly what comes into play. It's things you can't see, things that will never appear in front of you, things that will just impact you internally. And this is where things like spiritual hygiene are so essential, and energetic awareness is so essential. And this is something obviously we don't learn in high school. We didn't learn that class. You mentioned the wheels coming off the tricycle or whatever, the training wheels. We've never got on this bike, though. This is not something in our culture, especially with a physicalist paradigm, deals with. And yet that's ultimately what we need to deal with here.
Yeah, and I would, on that point, I would say that we do have precedent in the human story for kind of living and working and being with this deeper reality. Our oldest religious traditions are grappling with this, right? It's just that we look at those things now, we go, look at this dusty, old, weird, archaic thing that they do. And they do this thing in this church building, and he's telling me this is blood, he's telling me this is his body, this is super strange, and it is, right? There are these strange aspects to it, but those are communities of people who are trying to work through many of these same issues. It's just that from an outside perspective, it looks completely foreign. So I think that the point I'm making there is that we have the capacity, we have the capability, we just have to exercise it, right? To get back to an earlier point, we are all in a way impoverished in how we work through this kind of energy and energetic expression. It's not something that we are trained to do, that we're taught to do. We see glimpses of it in our daily lives, and if we're lucky, we're really present to those little glimpses that happen, and we marvel at them, and we go, oh wow, that was really incredible. How did that happen? I wish I could get that to happen again. Well, whatever, let me get back to my Netflix show or whatever. So I think we've really got to start thinking harder about the way we are in the world, the way we are with each other in the world. In many ways, it's helpful to just take UFOs out of the entire equation. Like, how should you be in the world? And what are the things that you need to work on in your life as you relate with other people, as you understand yourself? These are timeless things that are important and have always been important. So that's to me, kind of how you prepare or begin to prepare for some of these revelations, and have conversations, right? Connect with people, be vulnerable, wrestle with these things, be honest with how you're feeling, explore those feelings, don't subdue them, just if you're anxious about something, well, why? Like, kind of follow that, and what's the root source of that anxiety, unpack that. And that's difficult to do, because we do just kind of want to anesthetize ourselves and just pretend that we don't have any problems.
Yeah, and something I've said before is, like, if we can't get this human thing right, like, what does any of this other stuff even matter? I think, just being a good human in general is crucial, right? It's like, if we miss that part, we're missing the whole point, I think, to some extent. And I appreciate a lot of what you said. the more honest you are with yourself, and not just rationalizing all the time, and actually, being deeply honest with yourself in those kind of regards, it's all right there. You're gonna see it for what it is if you're willing to. And again, that's not an easy thing to do. It takes practice, right? In yogic practice and philosophy, they talk about satya, and which is truth or truthfulness, and that I believe it's one of the yamas. And the more truthful you are, especially with yourself, the more able you are to recognize truth. So that's a really interesting concept, I thought.
Hey, if I could just say, James, I love that you brought that up, because one of the components in my expanding awareness course is radical transparency. And it begins with that kind of self-awareness you're talking about. But the analogy I like to give with people, and it's true for yourself and it's true for your context, both your sort of visible context as well as the sort of aspects of reality you're not seeing directly. But you picture sort of still waters in the Mediterranean, where you go to some places where you can see all the way down to the seafloor. It's really clear. But the second you have a boat that goes by, even in the distance, and sets even just a subtle waves, then suddenly you can't see more than a couple of feet down. If you have silt that rises up, then you can't see clearly. And basically, even things like white lies or justifications, like you sort of talked about, these little things that we do that move us away from this clarity, this crystal clarity, impede our ability to be aware of our context. And so I totally agree with you. I think that's an essential thing. And it's one of the ways, speaking of what Nathan said, with being in the world, that can transform the world ultimately, is we can actually make it the norm to actually desire and cultivate radical transparency. When we do that with ourselves and with each other, then we will find many of our global problems solve themselves.
I just got like a chill thing from that. But I was actually going to go there and say, like, we really do have a tremendous ability, and we've heard about this even from contact experiences with the UFO phenomenon, that like we don't know how powerful we are, and our great ability that we have, that we haven't fully walked into, but they even admire us for our great potential. And whether you believe that or not, I think we do have a tremendous potential, and we need to exercise that, right? But it takes time and it takes practice. And I think that the first step in that is kind of like, right, admitting that we have this potential, right? Most people are just so busy with their day, or even maybe they're too busy chasing the UFO phenomenon or the UFO story, that they're not stopping to be with themselves and to recognize, like, even when you have those moments, I think everybody has these kind of moments where they step into their power because they have a necessity to, or feel really strongly about something. How when those moments occur, we see change. And just being aware of that, number one, is helpful, but then two, being able to practice and exercise that. And I think to some extent we are collectively growing in that way, even though it's a little hectic. But I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of that, and that's why we're seeing so many of these divergence. But again, I think there's a great potential and ability for us to step into that and make great changes together. So on that note, do do any of you guys have? We'll start with you, Darren. Any kind of parting words to the audience? It could be about the UFO phenomenon or the nature of reality, consciousness. Anything that you feel is like an important message to leave people off with.
Yeah, well, I would just again highlight this theme that's sort of come up amongst the three of us, that we don't want to focus on the pyrotechnics. That yes, that's an important part of this process, but it's only one part of the process. And in some ways, as we often say, when it comes to UFOs, the least interesting part is the UFOs. What's actually interesting is intelligence, consciousness, James, you talked about how they themselves say we don't realize how powerful we are. We are fragments of source consciousness, as are they, is what I would suggest to people. And so if we were to justify to ourselves chasing the hamster wheel of the UFO phenomenon without paying attention to, and importantly, cultivating, right? Actually spending the time and energy to cultivate this potential we have, then we miss the point of the entire enterprise, I would say. So if I leave people one thing, it's that yes, if this is your interest, this is one of your passions, great, but don't let it become the sole focus and lose sense of this bigger picture.
Yeah, and I struggle with this. I mean, I think we all do at some point or another, how to be more authentic in the world, how to be more present in the world. But as we've all pointed out, I think it can start with some very simple actions on our part. If you think about times in your life where you've been the most present to what's going on, here I'm thinking about if you've been in a relationship with someone and you're at the beginning of that relationship and you're paying attention to everything that they're doing, you want to know what they like, what they don't like, you're hyper focused on that because there's this sort of pure kind of attraction, the love that is happening and building there. And then and when it's genuine, it's reciprocated as well, and how powerful that is, right? So we have examples in our lived experience that we can lean on. It doesn't have to be a meditation on the top of a mountain. It doesn't have to be some sort of enlightenment experience. It can happen every single day if we just stop for a second and pay attention to it. And it might be something mundane but also beautiful, right? It might be as simple as the other day I'm driving down the road and I'm thinking about something Darren and I talked about, and I'm thinking about, for whatever reason, riding a motorcycle with him, and then he sends me a text a few minutes after that about riding a motorcycle or buying a motorcycle. And I mean, that doesn't mean we should go out and ride motorcycles tomorrow. It just means that this thing, whatever it is, this powerful thing is present in every facet of reality if we are just willing to be present to it, and to be changed and affected by it, to relate with it, and then to do that with others, right? If you're thinking about someone, if that person pops into your head and you're like, I wonder how they're doing, well, send them a text message. Don't just throw it away, just reach out to them. Maybe you need to, right? It's these little things. I think that's, at least for me, that's the advice that I give myself, is try not to get wrapped up in having the perfect X kind of practice, or doing the C5, or having an experience with a UFO. Don't think about that stuff, right? Start small. Think about just being present to the world and the space that you occupy within the world.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on, and also doing all the work that you do, right? With Point of Convergence. I think Darren does one of the best jobs I've ever seen of somebody trying to look at the bigger picture of the UFO phenomenon in such a comprehensive way. It's really awesome. And Liminal Phrames, which you both do, and Calling All Beings. So, everybody listening, go check out all their work. I'm going to have links in the description so you can find all their work, which is greatly appreciated. And, let's reconvene sometime.
Sounds great.
Sounds good. I've enjoyed it, James. Thanks.
Definitely. And I'll speak to you guys soon. Take care.
Take care.